Welcome to Great Minds with Michael Medved, and the title of our podcast lets you know, I think, who I am. And our special focus on this series of podcasts is exploring timeless ideas, permanent questions, enduring questions. And we do that with some of the greatest thinkers on the scene today. And today, I have the great privilege of speaking with one of the greatest and most wide-ranging minds of the 21st century about an ultimate, very appropriate question: the nature of mind itself, and whether artificial intelligence can ever truly match or somehow join with the human consciousness. My guest is the polymathic Yale computer scientist, David Gelernter. He's the author of The Muse and the Machine, Computerizing the Poetry of Human Thought, and Machine Beauty, Elegance and the Heart of Technology. Now, David's interests, his accomplishments, his areas of expertise, if I were to list them, would probably take up the rest of the entire podcast. They include painting and music and American history, and yes, politics, where David is a prominent political commentator, and he is, of course, much more. David Gelernter, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
First of all, maybe you can explain in terms that even lay people can understand. You are primarily, you have been a computer scientist. You've taught computer science for 30 years at Yale, more. You can explain your area of focus right now in your field of computer science.
Within computer science, it's AI, artificial intelligence, which is a fascinating, enchantingly fascinating field, and has extraordinary open questions, is a field in which brilliant thinkers have made a lot of progress. And yet we are extraordinarily far from reaching the goals, even fairly conservative statement of the goals that we'd like to reach. So we're way off, but the going is fascinating as we work our way very slowly forward.
Would you say, is it fair to say that the human mind is a form of computer?
I think that's a sort of cheapskate way of describing the mind. It is a form of computer in the sense that you could say it's a form of cash register, and it's a form of sports betting calculator, and it's a form of spell checker and so forth. It can do a lot of things, but its capacities are far, far beyond the capacities of any computer that exists, and also beyond the capacities of the theoretical computer, which the great mathematician Alan Turing defined back in the 1930s and has served as a theoretical touchstone for computing and mathematics ever since. So we're way off. Our actual computers get nowhere near the mind's capacities, but even a theoretical computer that can do every computation we can describe is far short of what the mind itself can do.
Ray Kurzweil, I know you referred to, who's a technology guru, has spoken about a singularity, that we are approaching the possibility of a melding of mind and machine. Is that an accurate prediction?
Well, I think that kind of catastrophe is very unlikely. We've shown enough discipline not to blow ourselves up with nuclear bombs for many decades, for several generations. And I think we'll show the discipline to restrict the damage we do with AI also. Now, we don't know how to do what Kurzweil describes. We don't know how to build software that is anywhere near the capacities of the human mind, but we are making progress, and there are dangers. It's not as if we're home free. But I think and hope that the public at large, the thinking public, whatever you want to call it, the educated public, is going to come to grips with these issues. It too easily dismisses them as technical stuff we don't need to worry about. We can leave to Ray Kurzweil. But if you do that, you'll regret it.
Okay, speaking of things that you will regret, you've written about, and it's extraordinary coming from a computer scientist, and you're a second generation computer scientist
True.
too, aren't you? Your dad taught computer science.
Well, he didn't only teach it. He was one of the inventors in the 1950s. He was one of the first three practitioners of artificial intelligence and developed at IBM Labs, at IBM Research Labs, many of the tools that continued in use for decades. So he was an inventor and a pioneer. True.
Yes, which again is fascinating. I want to come back to that for a moment. But in terms of future generations of children, you've warned about some of the perils of providing computers and unlimited access to computers to children at very young ages. What would you recommend for people who, well, for instance, our son, we've just welcomed our first grandchild,
Oh,
and she's
mazel tov.
Thank you. Well, she's of course, the most wonderful and extraordinary baby ever created, and but she also she has an instinct. It seems to be hardwired to grab hold of the iPhone of her mother and to use it and to manipulate it. Do you think that it's a good idea to provide babies, very young children, with access to computer technology?
I think it's a lousy idea.
Yeah.
We already see in teenagers, high school students, college students, those who are not only well educated but very smart, who can't spell, who can't write in a comprehensible way, in a cogent way, who have no concept of what it means to research a question other than typing a few words to a web search engine. And this is irresponsible of the parents and teachers to allow children to grow, to rear children without allowing their minds to develop the way they should and the way they naturally can. And children need to play with each other and to be by themselves some of the time and to read a lot of books and to romp outside. And I don't think they need to touch a computer until they're in their teens at least.
Now, you grew up in a household where your father was a groundbreaking and celebrated scientist and computer scientist. You also are identified as someone who has been an advocate for the necessary role in American life of religious faith. Your book, Judaism, A Way of Being, is a profound and pro-religious book. Was your upbringing religious?
Yes, my grandfather, blessed memory, was a rabbi in Brooklyn, and saw to my Jewish education, as my parents did also, and as Yale itself did. Yale has in the past staged wonderful Judaica courses. Varies, from decade to decade. But yeah, I'm lucky to be able to say I had a good Jewish education, and my wife and I have done our best to pass it on to our boys.
How many boys do you have?
Two.
Oh, wonderful. And in terms of the idea of human beings and machines, do we have any any example of artificial intelligence seeking religious answers the way that human beings do?
Well, artificial intelligence programs are just programs. They're just software apps that you can download or buy at the drugstore or wherever you buy your apps or download them from. And like any programs, they do exactly what they've been told to do, what they're programmed to do. AI programs are generally aimed at a specific problem, playing chess well, or playing some other game, or simulating the reading of English, or attempting to translate from one language to another, or making a robot behave in a somewhat intelligent way in the real world. So if one could very easily find a graduate student and say, write some software that will seek religious wisdom. And how would you manifest that? Well, I guess the program would type on the printer, display on the screen, who are we? Is there a God? How am I going to find out one way or the other? This has been bothering me ever since I was lithoed in the factory. But what would that mean? It's just output generated by complex electronic circuit. When I say no, I don't know of any program that does that, it really doesn't mean anything, because it would be trivial to do, but would be a meaningless accomplishment. In a deeper sense, has a program been written that, in the way a human child can do, can wonder? I can be amazed or astonished and look around and say, what is all this stuff, and what am I, and what am I doing here? A genuine intelligence. It's a fascinating problem, far, far beyond our capacities. We don't know how to get with anywhere near that. So it doesn't exist because it's impossible currently. With current technology, we don't know how to do it. We know how to get considerably closer to it than we are now, but fundamental questions remain. Will we ever solve them? Possibly. There's no theoretical reason why we should not solve them someday, but we don't know how. We don't know how to proceed. It's a mystery.
When you talk about a mystery, I mean, obviously, so much of your work has been at the cutting edge of technological sophistication right now. And yet you yourself and your father and your sons have all applied themselves to trying to take meaning from texts that date back to the Bronze Age, that are very, very ancient indeed. Why is that an appropriate endeavor for people?
Well, we need to connect ourselves into a tradition firmly rooted at the beginning of time, at the beginning of human time. We feel the need to be part of a rooted structure as opposed to a piece of tumbleweed. And a Jew or an American or a Westerner, I mean, one has all those identities simultaneously. Those are three extraordinarily rich traditions. And they're self-evidently rich. I think it doesn't take a lot of wisdom to see the wisdom in these traditions, and to hope and wish to be informed by some of the knowledge that animated Jefferson or Churchill or Disraeli or a million other thinkers, politicians, statesmen, artists, and so forth. The richness of our traditions is so deep and dazzling that you really can't miss it unless you try.
And you write about, you use a phrase that I love in your book on Americanism. You use the phrase Puritan Zionism. and usually when people use the term Puritan, they use it as a pejorative. They use it as some kind of insult on
True.
people. Explain what you mean by Puritan Zionism.
I have to say you're certainly absolutely right that Puritan is used pejoratively, which is enormously unfair. I mean, the Puritans invented the United States of America. It's turned
Amen.
out to be a pretty good idea, and shouldn't shortchange them. Puritan Zionism, the idea that America would be a city on a hill, an idea that appealed to John Winthrop before he had even landed at Boston while he was in mid-journey, that many of the early Puritan settlers and the Pilgrims, among others, recurred to. That is, their goal was not to own the world or to manage or rule the world in the sense that the British Empire at the time was moving in that direction, and other European powers were too, but to inspire the world. It was the firm intention of the founders of the New England colonies, and of some of the southern ones also, that they would build something so good that nobody could ignore it, that so dramatically obviously the way to go, that it would be imitated all over the world.
All right, and again, this is a sort of a multi-part question, and it's just a line of argument that I'd like to try out on you, David, which is that one of the things that's truly remarkable in American history, and it relates to several of your areas of concentration, is how many of the groundbreaking technological breakthroughs have occurred in the United States, particularly over the last, say, 150 years. I mean, it's astonishing when you look at it, because we're not that large a portion of the world's population. And yet, so many of the gifts, from the electric light to the phonograph, and yes, Alexander Graham Bell was from Scotland, but he developed the telephone here, to automobiles being developed here, and airplanes and computers. Is there something to be said about the nature of this technological advancement being so rooted in the American experience?
I think so. I mean, to be fair, the Germans and Austrians will be outraged because they invented the car in sort of a preliminary way. And certainly the English played a fundamental role in all sorts of things. And yet, you're absolutely right, or I am, if I make this assertion, I'm not sure. But the United States has produced a ridiculously rich and deep selection of innovations, of inventions, of new ways of thinking. And I think there's no way to deny that we've come up with a formula that brings out the best in people, that makes a virtue of freedom above all, of not butting in, of not, to put it in a negative way, but that's what freedom really is, not bothering other people and allowing them to do what they want to do. And does that work? It certainly does. It's done as all the world can see. It's put us in the position of leadership, of world leadership. It's put us in the position of the most admired, the most reviled, of course, as a matter of course,
No,
but
that goes
also
without saying.
on the ground, the most admired nation, the one traveling to which so many people set out, as they did in the 17th century. We've succeeded on an enormous scale, and our basic ideology is freedom, or you might say freedom in a biblical setting.
And by the way, this is all very consonant with what one of your Yale predecessors, Samuel F.B. Morse, was all about. And I say one of your predecessors because he was a painter, and he was a theologian and a deeply, deeply religious man who also invented the telegraph. And the first message that telegraph sent, as every school child used to know, was, "What hath God wrought?" which was a biblical citation, an Old Testament citation. And Morse saw the whole glory of the telegraph as being able to spread the gospel and spread what he considered to be ultimate truth. And yeah, we're concerned with ultimate truth, as is David Gelernter. I so much appreciate your contributions in this conversation. I encourage the audience to investigate all of your work further. You can find out all about his books and about his most recent columns by checking us out at mindswithmedved.com. Go to mindswithmedved.com. And while you're there, please do donate as generously as you feel motivated to do, because as our friends and sponsors at Discovery Institute will confirm, quality programming isn't entirely free. We need your support. And while you're at the website, don't forget to subscribe. It is a free service. And if you subscribe, you'll be able to rest assured you won't miss a single future edition of Great Minds with Michael Medved.